This video is the first in a series to help you understand a little bit more about the changes to student growth rubrics and student growth goal setting related to teacher evaluation here in the state of Washington. This video will give you a little bit of background about the when and the why. My name is Mark Gardner, and I teach at Hayes Freedom High School in the Camas School District. I'm a member of the Camas Education Association and the WEA, and I'm also statewide co-lead for the Marzano Instructional Framework. This video is going to focus on why the changes are happening, when they go into effect, and some of that important background that many of us need to really understand policy into practice. Back in 2010, the Washington State Legislature changed the way that teacher and principal evaluation occurs here in the state of Washington, establishing things such as the 4-tier rating system and the 8 criteria in teacher evaluation, and also identified that student growth data that is relevant to the teacher and subject matter must be a factor in the evaluation process. It goes on to define student growth as the change in student achievement between 2 points in time based on multiple measures of evidence, formative and summative assessment, and so on. That law also endows OSPI with the authority to provide descriptions and rules as well as updates to the policies once these policies get put in place. So that is the foundation in state law by which these rubrics have been revised over the last few years. So the revisions to the student growth goals began in earnest in 2020. So why even bother to change? We know that as systems, we need to continue evolving and improving. As we know better, we do better. That's kind of the essential idea of teacher evaluation in the state of Washington. It is not simply about rating and sorting teachers' principles in terms of the 4-tier rubrics. It's really about fostering growth. But stories from the evaluators and from teachers were indicating that that wasn't exactly what was happening with student growth goal setting in particular. Considering that student growth data was being tied to teacher evaluation in a way that made teachers feel like they had to set goals they could reach out of fear of having it reflect badly on their evaluation. So that led to minimizing risk-taking, minimizing trying new practices, and kind of just falling back into old patterns simply because we knew that they would work, rather than stretching and growing. That is a major reason why these rubrics have been revised the way that they are. In terms of the timeline, once those revisions were drafted back in 2020, numerous districts and even individual buildings across the state of Washington in 2021-22 tried out the rubrics, gave some feedback, and then in summer of 2022, a group of people got together to make revisions to the language to make them more user-friendly and clearer in terms of what might look like in practice. The 2022-23 school year and the 2023-24 school year are years of piloting and learning and practice and thinking about those 3 points at the bottom of your screen. What professional learning for teachers and evaluators was necessary? What local policies like collective bargaining agreements or memos of understanding may need to be bargained? And what local practices may need to be adjusted on the part of both teacher and evaluator? In 2024-25 school year, the new rubrics are statewide policy, and all teachers are expected to be evaluated using those rubrics beginning that school year. Hopefully, people are taking advantage of the opportunity to learn and practice during these interim years. But what's not changing is the essential structure of the rubrics related to TPEP and teacher evaluation. There are still 5 rubrics, with those point ones being related to the things that I as a practitioner have control over. The goals that I set, the assessments that I choose, the instructional practices that I put into play in order to foster growth for my students. The point 2s are also still about the results that I get from my students, the data that I see, and does it indicate the kind of growth that I was looking for. What is changing is particularly important. Now my student growth goal process really needs to center on my knowledge of my students' skills and their assets, and using that information not just to set goals, but to determine the kinds of activities that I engage my students with to foster their growth. And then the second part that's pretty significant is that these rubrics emphasize data analysis through reflection, as opposed to just gathering data and determining whether some, most, all, or nearly all of my students met their goal. Rather than just focusing on those numerical outcomes, this system really focuses on what do I do as a professional with the data, no matter what the data looks like. It's also important that we recognize that with any kind of statewide policy, there are going to be some misconceptions. And the biggest misconception that we've seen in these last 10 to 12 years is people understanding what is in statewide policy versus what is in local policy. It's very important that we recognize that a lot of the things that directly impact evaluators and teachers in the classroom and in the principal's office are often the results of local policies and local procedures that have been put in place, not necessarily the stuff that is in state policy. It's important with this opportunity to shift rubrics as well that we're wary of procedural inertia. This is going to invite the opportunity for us to change the way we do things. And I encourage everyone at all levels of the system to consider how this might result in new practices, new approaches, new culture building in different schools or buildings to overcome the kinds of things that have been problematic in terms of just compliance orientation related to student growth in the past. If you're watching this video, you probably are already on the OSPI website, but if not, it's important to recognize that there are a ton of resources and a constantly growing bank of resources on OSPI's website, including standalone PD modules that you or your staff can just pick up and use to better understand the different parts of the student growth goals. There's different vignettes and case stories, there's videos, there's other resources that you can find simply by Googling OSPI student growth and find your way to this webpage.